3 months after divorce, Millionaire runs into his ex-wife, but seeing her baby bump leaves him in regret. For years, Jonathan Davenport lived for the thrill of building an empire. As a multimillionaire tech entrepreneur in Hartford, Connecticut, he prided himself on mastering any challenge until his laser focus on success led him to sacrifice the one relationship that mattered most, his marriage to Helen Thompson. When Helen finally walked away, Jonathan assumed he could bury his regrets in more deals, business expansions, and constant motion. 3 months after their divorce, however, a fateful encounter in a cafe jolts him back to reality. Helen is pregnant, and the baby might be his. Confronted by heartbreak he thought he'd left behind, Jonathan must figure out whether redemption is even possible. A marriage strained by relentless ambition from a young age, Jonathan Davenport was wired for success. At 16, he took college-level technology courses, eager to break from a modest upbringing in Hartford. By 20, he'd launched an e-commerce site flipping used gadgets, investing every dime back into the business. After a sudden viral surge, venture capitalists flooded him with cash, and Jonathan transformed into one of those young entrepreneurs to watch. Yet even that early success foreshadowed something bigger. Feeling unstoppable, he formed Davenport Innovations, hiring a small but dedicated team, and steadily expanded into software updates, product prototypes, and investor pitches. Helen Thompson, on the other hand, approached life at a gentler pace. She volunteered at local museums, studied art history, and was drawn to quiet but meaningful hobbies like painting watercolors on lazy afternoons. She first spotted Jonathan rushing through campus with piles of cardboard prototypes. When a breeze scattered his designs, she helped him retrieve them. Their eyes met, and they instantly sensed an unusual connection. Helen was taken by his intense energy. Jonathan was fascinated by her calm presence. Soon, late-night chats over coffee turned into a relationship that, to many, appeared to bridge two completely different worlds. They married in an intimate ceremony, officiated by a family friend, Rachel Patterson, surrounded by blooming roses. The vow exchange was modest, no pomp of typical millionaire weddings, and for a while, both relished the closeness. Helen appreciated that despite Jonathan's grueling schedule, he'd still carve out spontaneous weekend getaways or movie nights. But when Davenport Innovations hit a wave of major investment, Jonathan's workload exploded. He traveled constantly, missed dinners and anniversaries, and dismissed Helen's gentle reminders that they once dreamed of having a family soon. At first, she tried to accept it, volunteering more at local art galleries to stave off loneliness. Gradually, though, each broken promise chipped away at the closeness they'd built. Late-night calls went unanswered, birthdays passed quietly, and their penthouse became a place where Helen felt alone in a crowd of Jonathan's corporate visitors. One night, after Jonathan missed yet another important date, Helen confronted him, trembling with both anger and sorrow. "When do I matter?" she'd whispered, tears in her eyes. He, exhausted from a contentious board meeting, snapped back, insisting all his hustle was for us. Deeply wounded, Helen left that evening to stay with her friend Jennifer Ross. Though Jonathan's apologies arrived in tearful voicemail messages, something vital in Helen had closed off. A few weeks later, she filed for divorce, with Jonathan blindsided, signing a generous settlement to atone for ignoring her needs. He tried to convince himself that giving her a large payout was enough, but regret followed him like a shadow. 3 months post-divorce shocking reunion. Despite the guilt, Jonathan told himself that focusing on big new projects would help him forget. For 3 months, he practically lived in the Davenport Innovations boardroom, forging deals to push new software releases. Yet he couldn't ignore the hollow feeling each night. Then one morning, at the Green Ivy Cafe, a cozy establishment known for local pastries, Jonathan's world was turned upside down. Standing in line for coffee, he suddenly recognized Helen's gentle laugh from across the room. Shocked, he glanced over to confirm it was indeed her and saw, to his amazement, that she was pregnant. Instant jealousy, confusion, and regret flooded him. Could she have found someone else so quickly? But as he approached, Helen confirmed the baby was his, conceived around the time she moved out. She said she tried to tell him, but he'd changed all his contact details. Now she was leaving Hartford for a job at Boston's Museum of Fine Arts, determined to raise the child alone if Jonathan persisted in burying himself in work. Overwhelmed, Jonathan pleaded for a chance to step up. Quietly, Helen scribbled her new phone number on a napkin and left, telling him if he truly cared, he'd call. Grappling with regret and taking action hours later, Jonathan cancelled his meetings, ignoring the confusion of his assistant, Caroline Morris. In the solitude of his office, he replayed Helen's words, remembering how he'd missed every milestone she must have faced alone doctor visits, the first hints of a baby's heartbeat. At night, he tried calling her number, left voicemails, but she remained cautious. He realized all the flowers and apologies from the past meant little if he wouldn't genuinely change. When they did meet in person, Helen insisted she wouldn't endure more disappointment. She explained she was transferring her prenatal care to Boston, and that time was short before she had to move. Jonathan, acknowledging he'd neglected her during their marriage, offered financial and emotional support. She reminded him that while money might help, she needed reliable commitment, something he'd never shown. Still, she allowed him to accompany her to the next ultrasound if he wanted. A flicker of hope stirred in Jonathan, fueling his vow not to fail her again. Rumors, paparazzi, and a vengeful ex-employee word spread across Hartford's tech and socialite circles. Jonathan Davenport's ex-wife was pregnant. Tabloid sites, including Celebrity Confidant, pounced on the story, labeling it the Davenport divorce scandal. Paparazzi harassed Helen, snapping photos near her apartment and turning her life into a spectacle. This only confirmed Helen's decision to move to Boston as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Jonathan scrambled to protect her from the invasive press. He threatened legal action against those fueling rumors. Hidden behind these events was Richard Slater, a former Davenport Innovations staffer once caught embezzling. Nursing a deep grudge, he sold personal information to tabloids, further fueling the scandal. Worse still, Slater tried to siphon money from Jonathan's personal accounts by forging wire transfers. Although Jonathan's security team froze the attempt, it underscored how vulnerable his life had become. Jonathan's mother intervenes. Adding to the chaos, Jonathan's mother, Miriam Davenport, who lived in Maine, forced her way into the situation upon learning she'd have a grandchild. She insisted on meeting Helen, determined to ensure the baby would grow up in a stable married home. Worried about Helen's stress levels, Jonathan arranged a discreet lunch at a French bistro. Miriam wasted no time in criticizing Helen for divorcing Jonathan and refusing to reconcile for the baby's sake. Helen stood firm, explaining she wouldn't be coerced into a broken relationship. Exasperated but protective, Jonathan defended Helen against his mother's pressure, realizing how often Helen had felt overshadowed by his world. Though the meeting ended tensely, it proved Jonathan was serious about placing Helen's well-being above family politics. Ultrasound reality and Jonathan's determination. When Jonathan accompanied Helen to her next ultrasound, he was overwhelmed by the baby's heartbeat echoing through the monitor. For a moment, he forgot about boardrooms and spreadsheets, mesmerized by the flicker on the screen. Helen, noticing his awe, remained guarded but allowed a small moment of warmth. Outside, paparazzi lurked, so he offered her discreet security or a safe place to stay. Helen refused, knowing she'd already planned to leave soon. She wanted independence, not extra reminders of Jonathan's protective bubble that once left her feeling invisible. Before she drove away, she gave him a fragile but genuine smile, grateful he'd tried to show up. Meanwhile, Richard Slater escalated his sabotage, finally triggering a flagged transaction of $500,000. Jonathan's legal team intervened just in time, and Slater was arrested. Relieved to neutralize the threat, Jonathan then wondered if he should call Helen to assure her she was safe. He did, and their late-night phone exchange was unexpectedly calm, both feeling a flicker of hope. Helen's move to Boston with Slater apprehended. Helen fast-tracked her new job at the Museum of Fine Arts. The museum's head of conservation, Kate Whitman, praised her specialized knowledge and was eager for her to begin. Helen spent her final days in Hartford, packing her apartment, often with Jonathan's help. Each night he discovered more of her life. He'd missed her painting supplies, the souvenirs from trips they once took. He realized success had come at the cost of so many shared experiences. At a small farewell party organized by Jennifer Ross, friends celebrated Helen's move. Jonathan brought a high-tech baby monitor, symbolizing his promise to remain connected even long distance. Touched, Helen invited him to follow her to Boston and see the new apartment. It wasn't a romantic gesture exactly, but an acknowledgement he was the baby's father. They convoyed up the highway at dawn. Arriving in Boston, Helen breathed in the youthful energy, historical buildings and bustling sidewalks. Her new apartment was modest but charming, with big windows that let in plenty of natural light. Jonathan helped carry boxes, assemble furniture, and marvel at the space Helen would call home. During quiet breaks, they recalled simpler times, bridging the distance that once felt insurmountable. A premature scare, although Helen settled in, trouble struck around her 34th week of pregnancy. Contractions started unexpectedly while she was at work. Rushing from Hartford mid-presentation, Jonathan found Helen in the hospital, hooked to monitors and terrified. Doctors managed to halt the preterm labor, prescribing bed rest. Jonathan rented a short-term place nearby to stay close. For days, he juggled Davenport Innovations calls from hospital corridors, helped with small errands, and studied baby care. Witnessing Jonathan's unwavering presence softened Helen's wariness. Each shared meal or gentle reassurance chipped away at her skepticism. She recognized glimpses of the man she fell for long ago, back when he spared time for spontaneous dates and heartfelt conversations. Though she remained cautious, nights spent discussing possible names or nursery themes brought them closer than they'd been in ages. Nearing full term, Helen's decision to let Jonathan in eventually. Helen's condition stabilized, and she was released with instructions to rest at home. Jonathan pivoted more of his company responsibilities to trusted colleagues, including CFO Brian Pierce. The board, once anxious about their hyper-driven CEO stepping back, discovered productivity soared when tasks were delegated. Freed from 24/7 business demands, Jonathan immersed himself in fatherhood prep, reading about newborn routines and offering to help at every step. Helen gradually accepted his support, acknowledging that having him nearby alleviated her burden. She marveled at the old Jonathan, who once ignored her pleas, now massaged her aching feet and insisted she skip chores. Tension with Miriam eased slightly too, as the older woman apologized for pressuring Helen. Neither mother-in-law nor ex-daughter-in-law were best friends, but they came together for the baby's sake. Labor and delivery, Jonathan's greatest test at 37 weeks. Helen woke before dawn with persistent contractions. Panting through the pain, she called Jonathan, who arrived in minutes. Racing to the hospital in the pre-dawn gloom, nerves rattled both of them. 14 intense hours later, hours filled with compressed breathing, fearful tears, and Jonathan's trembling encouragement, Helen finally delivered a healthy boy, Samuel David Davenport Thompson. Overwhelmed by emotion, Jonathan cut the umbilical cord with shaking hands. No triumph in the corporate realm compared to hearing his son's first cries. Helen, drained but relieved, cradled Samuel, whispering how perfect he was. Jonathan stared, tears in his eyes, as medical staff handled the newborn's routine checks. This delicate human life overshadowed every boardroom pitch, every restless night spent chasing profit. By the time Helen drifted off, Jonathan realized he'd never felt more fulfilled. In hushed hospital corridors, he called family and friends. Jennifer squealed with glee. Miriam, teary, vowed to visit soon. Returning to Helen's bedside, he held her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers in a gesture of quiet solidarity. She thanked him for staying. He reminded her she did all the hard work, then more seriously confessed he'd never been prouder of her. Adjusting to parenthood and a second chance, Helen and Samuel were discharged a couple of days later, given a clean bill of health. Jonathan insisted on assisting her home, balancing fatherly duties with oversight of Davenport innovations. Miraculously, he found genuine satisfaction in 2 feedings or diaper changes, an intimacy he once believed had no place in his life. Miriam Davenport arrived soon after, softened by grandmotherly love. Past tensions lingered, but the shared desire to nurture. Samuel overshadowed old grudges. Meanwhile, Jonathan and Helen co-parented in Boston, forging a surprisingly harmonious routine. Late-night crying sprees turned into quiet bonding sessions with baby Samuel. Doctor visits became joint outings, with Jonathan scribbling notes, determined not to miss any milestone. Even mundane tasks, like grocery runs, took on a gentle warmth, reflecting how far they'd come from the lonely penthouse nights. One evening, as Samuel dozed in a worn wooden rocker, Helen approached Jonathan. Tears in her eyes, she admitted she still loved him, but was afraid to jump straight back into marriage. Jonathan, humbled, promised no pressure, only consistent support. They held each other, baby breathing softly in the background, each heartbeat echoing the possibility of rebuilding not only a family, but a deeper partnership grounded in respect. There would be struggles ahead, old wounds, the demands of parenthood, remnants of heartbreak. But the birth of Samuel offered a chance to begin again, stronger than before. Jonathan discovered that fatherhood, empathy, and daily devotion far outshone any corporate conquest. Helen, now more assured, saw that forgiveness didn't equal forgetting. It meant granting both him and herself permission to try anew. Helen Thompson and Jonathan Davenport's journey proves that even painful regrets can yield renewed hope. Once consumed by his tech empire, Jonathan lost sight of Helen's patience and unwavering support. It took the shock of her pregnancy and his near absence from that crucial reality for him to face the consequences of his ambition. Meanwhile, Helen, having endured loneliness in a marriage overshadowed by spreadsheets, found herself rediscovering Jonathan's sincerity in the tender moments of co-parenting. Nothing about their path back to one another is neat or guaranteed. The tabloids, family pressures, and post-divorce scars remain. Yet as they share late-night bottles, celebrate baby Samuel's first smiles, and gradually let the trust rebuild, they discover that love can triumph if fueled by genuine remorse, vulnerability, and the willingness to do better each day. If their story moves you cheering at each tested moment, from heartbreak to the promise of rebuilding a family, please consider sharing this narrative of second chances. Sometimes, the greatest measure of success isn't a soaring company valuation, but the courage to show up for the people you've hurt, forging a healthier, more authentic bond against all odds.